So high functioning codependency, my definition is it is you being overly invested in the feeling states, the outcomes, the circumstances, the relationships, the situations, the finances, the careers of the people in your life to the detriment of your own internal peace. Women who've killed themselves to have it all, and they're like, wow, this can't be it, and feeling very unsatisfied in their lives
Yeah.
because nobody knows them, right? They're just checking boxes and getting shit done, but not from a place of authenticity. Your boundaries are made up your preferences, your desires, your limits, and your deal breakers.
Hmm.
So it's never really, it's not a lever to control them. And this might sound like semantics, but I don't feel like it is. We were trained, we were indoctrinated, and that shit is learned, and we can unlearn it and empower ourselves around it. But we're changing it. Like
Hmm.
what's happening in society, it's the people who are being oppressed by this that are doing the best that they can to change it. And that's what I feel like this is. When we stop
Yeah.
being high functioning codependents and we stop sort of towing this line, we are now being cycle breakers generationally of like the next generation.
Yeah. Hey friends, this is the Hardcore Self-Help Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Robert Duff. Today on the show, I have Terri Cole. Terri is a licensed psychotherapist, a boundary expert, and the author of Too Much, a guide to breaking the cycle of high-functioning codependency. Terri has spent decades helping people recognize and break free from patterns of overfunctioning, overgiving, and chronic people-pleasing. In this conversation, we explore high-functioning codependency, what it is, how it sneaks into our lives, and what we can do to reclaim our time, energy, and peace. Terri also shares personal stories, practical tools, and some hard-hitting truths about boundaries, self-abandonment, and the impact of societal conditioning. If you've ever felt like you're carrying the weight of everybody else's problems, this episode is for you. So before we dive in, please remember, subscribe, like the video, give me a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Please do what you can to support the show. It makes a huge difference for me. And enjoy the interview. All right, everybody. Super excited to have a guest today. I have Terri Cole. Terri, how are you feeling today?
Great. How are you feeling, Robert?
I'm very good. I'm excited to talk to you. We're going to talk about all things codependency, a little bit of boundary sprinkled in there.
Mm-hmm.
Before, though, I always like to ask a bit more about, my guests. So, what do we need to understand about you or your story to understand how you got into this field and, boundaries and codependency and all that?
I don't know. I think that you teach what you most need to learn. So I feel like anything that, for me, every single thing that I've ever been deeply passionate about is because it's something that I suffered deeply from and was able to find a way out, or things that worked, or mentors or teachers, and so then I want, being a codependent that I am, I want everyone to not have the pain that I had, you know? So I think that that's part of it. Is it's really like I'm a code journeyer. And for a lot of the people who follow me, I'm just, I've been a psychotherapist for 27 years. So in some ways, I'm ahead of the curve, but I'm always learning and I'm always on this evolutionary path personally. And that's what I'm most interested in, is helping people just have happier lives, just less suffering, more joy is really like my trip.
Mm. Did you want to be a therapist when you grew up, when you were a kid?
No, apparently I wanted to be a stripper and a bilingual secretary when I was in third grade. Those I couldn't decide which one. So when the teacher
Why
asked, I
not
said
both?
both. My mother was like, excellent. I wasn't sure. It's funny. I've always been someone, and still am, who's really in love with life, like super just in lust with this experience on earth. And even as a kid, I was very like, wherever I was, I was. I loved school. I loved being home. Not that I didn't have any problems, but I was always very like, yay to
Hmm.
whatever the thing is we were going to do. And so when I graduated school, I just like got a job. I was like, oh, I'm just gonna move to New York City with a friend and I'm just gonna get a job. And I got a job as like a receptionist in the garment center. Like, what? My father was
Sure.
like super psyched. I paid for your marketing degree. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
But I didn't care, right? Because it was just the experience. And then hated the garment district was just sexist, racist, gross. So I didn't stay there that long, but I was sort of just climbing the ladder. And I feel like wherever you are if you're ambitious, you'll be that way whether you're working in Starbucks or whether you're wherever you are. Like some people just ascending is part of your natural plan, you know?
Hmm.
Um, and then I became actually a talent agent because that's what I was most naturally interested in is just entertainment.
Mm.
So I never was interested in fashion, still not. Wasn't then, I'm not now. Even though I was, I was in that industry for a while.
You are quite
Talent is,
fashionable, though, if anybody's watching the video. So some of that stuck around.
well, I thank you. In my own way. But it was like when I got into entertainment, I the last 4, let's say, years of my career there, I was actually negotiating contracts for celebrities and supermodels. And
Mm.
this was in the 90s when supermodels were like, it was crazy. Like
Yeah.
the amount of power, and it was all of that whole pack of women who I'm still, I still, you see what they're doing today. All of them have done, so many of them have done such amazing stuff in the world, from Cindy Crawford to even Naomi Campbell now having a
Hmm.
kid, like all of them doing different things. But back then, people were enamored with beauty in a different way, this
Hmm.
industry. And now this is happening. There's a parallel process going on in my life where I am becoming healthier and healthier mentally. So I started therapy when I was 19. I quit drinking when I was 21, when I was still in college, because I definitely needed to. And so now I've had a bunch of years of therapy, right? So trying to get myself into a more empowered place in life. And now I'm in an industry that's like not a hotbed of mental health.
Yeah.
So the healthier I got, the less I felt like I could stay there. And I could no longer deny um, that what I was really interested in and the only thing I cared about was the mental health of my clients. And that was it. I was getting people into drug treatment clinics, eating disorder clinics, therapy. Like I was, that's it. I was singularly focused. So I knew, I was like, you have to get out of here because I didn't care about the Pantene deal or the movie deal. And I was like, yeah, it's time to go before you
Mm.
start really doing a crappy job. And someone who had been my assistant in the business was like, do you want to go to grad school and become a therapist? And I was like, yes, I do, in fact. And we applied together. And I literally applied to one school. I applied to NYU. I've been living in New York over a decade at that point. I'm like, I'm not moving to fucking Omaha. Like, I'm not. And I'm not moving to
Sure.
Boise. I'm not moving anywhere. I'm doing it right here. And actually, the only program I wanted to do was the NYU one because it was very clinically based. And then I got in and I was like, holy crap. Now I got to go.
Guess that's what you're doing now.
I guess this is what's happening now. So that was challenging. And, people would think, because I had been making a lot of money for a long time, lots of people were like, good thing you had a lot of money. I was like, well, actually, I didn't really save any of that money because I just traveled around the world and did whatever I wanted and
Yeah.
lived my life. And I think I had $900 in the bank. And I was like, well, you've never been bad at being poor, and having money has never made you happy. So, meaning, yes, privilege, freedom, yes, I love it. Traveling, of course, but actual happiness. I was like, you can definitely be poor again. You'll be fine.
Mm.
And I was. I was poor again, and I was fine. I was making enough money because I was still running the talent agency
Oh,
remotely
wow.
the entire time I was in grad school, and I'd made exactly enough money there to cover my therapy, my Equinox gym membership, and I think there was one other thing, like not my rent though. So I got very creative very quickly as to what I was going to do to make money. And I was like, I should just teach. Every agent who stops being an agent just teaches acting. Not that I knew, because I didn't. That's exactly what I did. But I taught the business of the business
Mm.
um, at NYU. So I did that for a while I was in school. And then I just opened up the second I graduated, passed the test, and opened my private practice. And that was 27 years ago.
Wow. Thanks for the insight. Throughout that, there's a thread of like really, really strong self awareness. Does that come
Hmm.
to you naturally?
I think that getting into therapy at such a young age of my life
Mm.
planted those seeds since I was only 19. I don't think if I hadn't had a therapist sort of guiding me on what self reflection even is,
Yeah.
I think I would have. And same thing with stopping drinking. Like, if I hadn't stopped drinking at 21, I probably would have stopped by like 31. right?
Mm-hmm.
I think I would have eventually gotten there after like a decade of bullshit, though, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Bad choices, numbing instead of dealing, like all the things that addictive stuff has you do in your life, right? It's basically you being like, oh my God, why so many fires? Why are there so many fires in my life? And
Sure.
then you go, oh shit, I'm the pyro. I'm literally like, it's me, my mismanagement of my life, my relationships, and this addiction, because, alcohol is like no joke when you're addicted.
Sure.
Um, so I feel like the getting into therapy early, I would just was very lucky
How did you do that?
that
Like, how the heck did you get into therapy at that age, at that time? Because it wasn't as popular as it is now.
it was not as popular. I was in college actually, and that's where it started. And it's
Mm-hmm.
funny, the person I met and started seeing, she was in school. Like she was an intern. She was retired from
Mm-hmm.
the New York Ballet. She was a prima ballerina. Late in life, she was probably already in her 60s, becoming a therapist, and she was so good.
Mm-hmm.
And I literally stayed with her for years. I moved to New York City and took a friggin' train once a week to go see her
Wow.
every single week and walked a mile to her house from the train station and a mile back at like 10:30 at night. Like, are you nuts? There are so many therapists in New York, but I just was like, this is a good thing. So that I feel incredibly like um, just blessed. And yes, it's both. It's me too, right? Because I was always curious because I didn't want to stay in pain because
Yeah.
I saw there was a lot of addiction in my family system. I'm the youngest of four sisters. Everyone, this is how everyone dealt. I was drinking a lot since the age of like 12, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So even though people are like, "Oh, you stopped so young," I was like,
Like,
"Yeah, but I did about a
got a
good
few years on the
decade."
clock. Yeah.
Exactly. Um, but once you learn the way of figuring out problems
Mm-hmm.
from a psychotherapeutic point of view, long before I was a therapist, once you get that it really is you. Like, how many times did my therapist say when I'd be like, if my boss wasn't like this, and if my boyfriend wasn't like that, if my friend hadn't done this, and in all of those instances, she's like, babe, hello, you are the common denominator. And it's so empowering in a young life to go, well, if it's me, then I can do something about it rather than trying to change other people and endlessly failing.
Mm-hmm.
So I do feel very grateful. And I was so enthused by how I transformed my own life, my own internal life mostly. I mean, my outside life, of course, reflected that too. But it was really, how do you feel inside, in your own body, in your own skin, in your own life? And therapy helped so much because I didn't learn from my family of origin. I didn't learn about communication. I didn't, who did? Did you? I mean, I'm just curious. Did anybody?
Not in the way that I hope I'm teaching my kids about it.
Right on. Exactly. It was a lot of passive aggressive and indirect. And I feel like our parents did the best that they could, and okay, great. But yeah, there was much to be desired there.
Mm-hmm.
And getting into therapy that young, I think, really influenced everything. Even though I had a whole decade of career before I became a therapist,
Yeah.
the whole time I was like working on myself, you know?
Yeah. Amazing. Um, Now, before this most recent book, you wrote one about boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Was that a natural extension of what you did for work or your own experiences? How did boundaries become the focus?
Well, I was such a boundary disaster personally.
Mm-hmm.
I had such porous boundaries. I was a people pleaser, but I was super high functioning, so it sort of might not present that exact way,
Mm-hmm.
but I was seeking outside validation. I have a father wound, so I was seeking to prove that I was not born the wrong gender. Like we all have like whatever bullshit we're sort of working
Mm-hmm.
out in our lives. So in therapy is when I started, and really I had a very pivotal experience I actually write about in the second book, which is
Mm-hmm.
called Too Much, which is out now. That one of my sisters was in, she kind of had a history of bad relationships and addiction. And she was in an abusive relationship with a guy living in upstate New York in a house that had no running water, no electricity, in the woods, right? Totally isolated. She was actively drinking and he was doing drugs and abusive. So it was just a nightmare. And for me, being a high functioning codependent, which we'll get into, meaning I felt highly responsible to save her, to get her out of there. And I was crying to my therapist, being like, I've done everything. Like, I've done it all. I've given all the money. I've sent all the books. And I said, what am I going to do? And she said, very compassionately, but very straightforward, Terri, let me ask you a question. What makes you think you know what your sister needs to learn and how she needs to learn it in this lifetime? And I was like, well,
Well, God damn
I
it, you're
think,
right.
damn, damn you, Bev. But I did say, hey, I think we can both agree she doesn't need to do it with this piece of shit in the woods with no running water. And she said, here's the thing, I can't agree to that because I'm not God. I don't know what your sister needs to learn. And she said, but do you know what's going on for you? And I was like, clearly I do not. So fill me in, would you? And she said, listen, you worked really hard to create this harmonious life. And your sister's dumpster fire is really messing with your peace. And you really want your peace. And I was like, wow, she is, again, not wrong. There's truth in that. A little painful, right? Because I
Mm-hmm.
think that in my young mind, I was like, my love was a little more Mother Teresa-ish. But it was more about me than I would have liked to have admit, I guess. And I said, but what can you do? And she's like, boundaries. You need boundaries. I was like, excuse me, what is
Yeah.
that? Help. And she helped me. And I talked to my sister and said, hey, I can't talk to you about this guy. But if you ever want to get out of this situation, I am always and will always be your person. And about 9 months later, maybe we talked a couple of times, but it was hard for me and for her, I imagine. And she called and said, hey, are you still my person? I was like, fuck yes, I'm getting in my car right now.
Mm.
And the important part of that whole story is A, the boundaries I was able to draw, which liberated us both. It liberated my sister to do what she needed to do in her life. She wasn't leaving that person until she was ready to leave. She needed to reach her own bottom. It wasn't about what I wanted. And I needed to respect her sovereignty and her right to do it how she needed to do it, which was so hard. But what came out of it is instead of her baby sister, being the hero of her story, she got to be the hero of her own story, got sober, went back to school, that was decades ago. She'd never been in another abusive relationship. Like all of that is her life, her narrative to write, not mine. And so I learned so much about boundaries and then ultimately about codependency from that experience. Because if we think about codependency, right, what is it? I write about high functioning codependency because none of my clients identified with what codependency is, like the Melody Beatty codependent no more, you have to be enabling an alcoholic
Mm.
codependency. And I was like, that's not even what it is, but that's what people think it is. So I would, in my therapy practice, still do have all these extremely capable masters of the universe type women who are building empires and just getting it done, whatever it is in their
Mm-hmm.
life. And being amazing mothers and partners and daughters and humans, like just doing it all. And if I would say, oh, hey, what you're describing in that relationship, that's a codependent pattern, immediately they would be like, wrong,
Yeah.
negative,
Like
you know,
defensive.
oh yeah. And also being like dependent. I'm not dependent on squat lady.
Sure.
Everyone's dependent on me. I'm making all the money. I'm making all the moves. I'm doing all the emotional labor. Like there's no way. So it made me realize, okay, my clients don't know what codependency is, so start there. And also, codependency has changed. And that what I created in this book, and I mean, I coined a new phrase, it's pretty gut, it's like a little bit nervy to just be
Mm-hmm.
like, this doesn't exist, but I see it and I've seen it for 27 years. It does exist, it just hasn't been named.
Yeah.
So by adding high functioning to codependency, this is codependency for modern life, for what modern women in particular, and listen, I've had tons of men get in touch with me and be like, I am this, my husband's an HFC, high functioning codependent. Like this, it's not that it cannot affect
Mm-hmm.
people who identify as men, but I'm an expert at women, right? So
Sure.
that's the lens through which that I write it. But as soon as I added that to codependency, they could see themselves, because my problem was this: if they can't see themselves in the problem, how can I help them get to the solution? I can't, because they were like me, thinking it's really their boss, it's really their partner, it's really this someone else.
Mm-hmm.
When the truth is, it was really them. So, high functioning codependency, my definition is it is you being overly invested in the feeling states, the outcomes, the circumstances, the relationships, the situations, the finances, the careers of the people in your life to the detriment of your own internal peace. So, I make the distinction that it's not the same as being a caring, empathic person. I really hope you get what you want, right? It's feeling responsible for you
Mm.
getting what you want, or for how you feel, or for fixing your problems. And that's the difference between being caring and being codependent.
I personally think it's probably something that I've contended with, and I imagine, let me know based on your experience, but I imagine people in helping professions like us probably are a bit overrepresented in that population.
Absolutely. Fact.
Yeah. It's
So many.
because it seems like it's sort of on a spectrum, right? Like on one side, being empathetic, anticipating needs, things like that make you a
Mm-hmm.
good, whatever it is, therapist, partner, boss, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But it sounds like on the other side of that is what you would call this high functioning codependency.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's
Okay.
the extreme. So if we look at I think that it could be helpful, and you tell me if you want to go here, looking at the traits,
Yeah.
right? Like what are the actual behaviors of being an HFC, as we
Hmm.
call it?
Yeah.
So
Please.
feeling responsible for fixing other people's problems, going above and beyond. A lot of times doing things that someone hasn't asked you to do, but you feel like it needs to be done. Always ready to jump into damage control mode because we literally are the best people in the world in a crisis. Like we are like, let's up and go. Like I have a plan. I know people. I've got stuff to do. Um, Being hyper independent, so sort of reluctant or reticent to ask for help or to accept help for a whole myriad of reasons, which we can certainly get into. Um, Auto advice giving is a major behavior
What's
where
that?
we just can't stop giving our good ideas to people
Mm.
about what they should do about their problem. Even if it's, I mean, I was down to the granular level of, when I was living in LA years ago, being like, remember, don't take the 405. There's construct, like, I can't even let you drive home. I can't even let you trust Waze. I'm so busy controlling what happens in your life.
Hmm.
So, auto advice giving is just, it's like the go to when someone's in pain, the first thought is, what can I do? And with HFCs, so much of the time, we're excellent problem solvers, very smart, like really probably have great ideas. So we don't get why we shouldn't share our great idea.
Mm.
I will get to why we shouldn't
Sure.
necessarily, but I get it. We're overly self sacrificing. Like if you're an HFC, you're kind of always just willing to take one for the team because really what you want is peace. You want everyone to be okay. You want everyone else to be okay. You want everything to be okay. So you're like, oh yeah, it's fine. You guys go. I'll do whatever thing needs to be done. Again, there is so much, I would say, at the foundation of any variety of codependency. The foundation of that behavior is a covert or overt bid or desire or attempt to control other people's outcomes. So when we think about that, that's like there's a lot of behaviors that can fall under there. So we already did auto advice giving. Auto accommodating is another one where I actually just share a story in the most recent book about being in a salon, a busy salon in Manhattan on a Saturday, and I'm laying in the sink because I have some treatment on my hair that's going to be like 20 minutes. And now suddenly there's a line starting to back up for the sink. And now I'm getting anxious that, like, I don't need the sink. I could move. Like, why are they? Every new person that's standing online, I'm more and more like, I can't even take it. I raise my hand. I say to the assistant, hey, I could move. She was like, yeah, bitch, we do this every Saturday. Like, I'm good. Don't worry. I mean, she was nice about it, but she was
Sure.
a little bit like, we got it covered. Relax. And I was thinking to myself, and this was, I mean, to be honest, this was only 5 years ago. So this is why I talk about recovering.
Hmm.
Just like alcohol, you are not recovered. It's like when you're recovering, right? It's just a different behavior. It's not like I never want a glass of wine. I just don't have a glass of wine because I'm recovering. And the same thing with HFC. It's not that I don't have a desire to control things that are not mine to control. I just learned to change my behavior. I give myself a beat and I don't raise my hand and say the thing to the lady, and I just let the chips fall where they may when they're not my mother effing chips. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? But when you're an HFC, you think all the mother effing chips are yours, which is part of the problem because there's an over responsibility that
Mm.
we feel. So that's auto accommodating. Then we have anticipatory planning, where maybe you're going to be with your family or you're going to be with someone who you know is difficult. And you're literally thinking about all the things that could go wrong and all the what you're going to do to make them not go wrong. So you're with this difficult uncle and this difficult uncle. I had two uncles who didn't talk to each other, and I would be having them over for this is years ago. I'd be having them over for Christmas, and I'd be like, okay, I'll make sure I have the booze that Uncle Bob likes, the booze that Uncle Jimmy likes. I'll make sure they don't sit near each other at the dinner table, and I'll instead of just being normal and being like, if you two idiots can't get along, then don't come. Like instead of having a grown up conversation, when you're an HFC, you don't know how to do that.
Mm.
So you're like puppet mastering situations as opposed to that. And then we have the overfunctioning and underfunctioning dynamic, which I used to say, or I still say, that in my 20s, I could take a perfectly functional boyfriend and turn him into an underfunctioner in 2 weeks or less by just always being like, I got it, I got it, I got it,
Uh,
right? Sooner or later, as my mother would tell you, people will stop offering if you don't ever take them up on it. And last but not least, there is a whole lot of self abandonment that is required to live your life doing all of these behaviors.
I think a lot of people here are probably feeling personally targeted.
Don't worry, I am you. I am
Yeah,
you.
yeah. And all the listeners, everyone's like, stop, like, stop perceiving me.
Seriously.
So where does this
There's
come
so much,
from?
well, childhood, of course. I hate to go back to the scene of the crime, as I call your family of origin, but I must because
Hmm.
it is. And it's not just, people think. I did a show the other day with Danny Morell, and he was like, "Oh, so everyone who does this has a father wound." I'm like, "No, man, that's really not true." Because just living in a patriarchal society, you could have had a pretty normal family. Just the expectations of how you will behave, what, especially women, again,
Hmm.
men too, but the problems for little boys who become men are in some ways different, some ways the
Oh
same.
yeah.
It's like be a good person and do the right thing, and okay, we get that pressure. But then there's women, it's more like be agreeable, be pleasant, don't be a drama queen, don't have a big mouth, don't make a big deal out of nothing, don't make a mountain out of a molehill. Like
Don't forget to
it
smile.
is, yeah, exactly. Don't forget to smile. Where's my happy girl? Turn that frown around. I mean, we could keep
Mm.
going. So you're indoctrinated into behaving in a way that is so self-abandoning. It's just natural. If you think of yourself first, I mean, I think that the Girl Scouts credo is like literally like everyone else and then me. Like I don't even know.
Sure,
I never was in
sure.
that thing, but it's something to that degree. So we learn, especially with women, you learn to be feminine. What is that like? Is that taking over? Is that building an empire? People think that's feminine. No, they don't actually. I mean, that's changing. But so we learned the more self-sacrificing, the better. They would describe people and be like, "Oh my God, Robert, you would love Betty. She would give anyone the shirt off her back." I want to be like, just keep your fucking shirt on, Betty. Like, well, why are we giving anyone her
Right.
clothing? Why not some discernment? Why is that being applauded? Why do we
Hmm.
think that's good? So we come by it very naturally. And it's something that we have to, in order to change it, there's a couple of things that we can do right off the bat to like alleviate some of the pressure. So if you guys are feeling like called out or like I'm talking to you,
Hmm.
this is for you. These are a bunch of easy things that you can do that will make it better for you. Because this isn't just about what do we rob other people of, their autonomy and a million other things. It's what is the cost to us? Burnout, your health. I mean, the amount of women who come into my office with autoimmune disorders,
Hmm.
TMJ, insomnia, lack of joy, women who've killed themselves to have it all. And they're like, wow, this can't be it. And feeling very unsatisfied in their lives
Yeah.
because nobody knows them, right? They're just checking boxes and getting shit done, but not from a place of authenticity, right? From a place of society says, do this, have the 2.2 kids, make sure they go to Ivy League schools, make sure you got money in the bank, make sure you travel, make sure you give back, make sure you, I mean, it's really depressing to see someone in their seventh decade of life being like, I've done it all. Is this the way I'm supposed to feel? Is this all there is?
Mm-hmm.
And if you build your life on boxes that someone else constructed, then the answer is yeah. So we do not want that, and we don't want people ending up there. So anyway, back to solutions. Stop being so depressing.
Can I pause you
All
for
right,
a sec?
you sure can.
I want to applaud you for not bullshitting about, you know, that a patriarchy exists, about some of these, factors that are there. I think a lot of people in a position like yours would be a little too mild about that when it is a real factor that plays into everything you're talking about.
But how?
Mm-hmm.
How could anyone with a brain and eyeballs think the patriarchy doesn't exist? Hello, have you read any history books? Have you looked at the way this country was built? I'm just curious. Anybody? Like, I don't know how we could, but I know what you're saying. Speaking plainly, I feel like is good, and it's the truth.
Yeah.
And again, I'm also not losing my shit about the patriarchy. I'm saying these are real factors. And we have things that we can do to make it better. We were trained, we were indoctrinated, and that shit is learned, and we can unlearn it and empower ourselves around it. But we're changing it. Like
Mm-hmm.
what's happening in society, it's the people who are being oppressed by this that are doing the best that they can to change it. And that's what I feel like this is. When we stop
Yeah.
being high functioning codependents and we stop sort of towing this line, we are now being cycle breakers generationally of like the next generation.
Yeah.
So another cost to us that I want to talk about before we get into
Yeah.
solutions
Yeah.
is what I've seen, and it's like hard to describe, but it's like I call it living life light, like LITE,
Mm-hmm.
because we spend so much time in our minds and sort of playing chess in our minds with our relationships and with what people need and being overly concerned and being these high level people pleasers and problem solvers and making sure everything is okay and being the rock that people go to, that we're not really fully present. And so life is like half as sweet, right?
Mm.
Half as impactful, half as juicy as it should be. It's like constantly being on your phone, even if you're not on your phone.
Sure.
It's like what happens to the way we experience these important moments in our lives. It just doesn't leave the same imprint. So, presence is a huge gift that we can give ourselves as we get into recovery from these habituated behaviors.
Mm.
So the first thing that you guys can do right now, you can literally implement this moment in your life, that if you identify as being an auto advice giver, right? If you're someone who there's not a problem that you can't fix, not to quote some stupid rapper, um, you can stop right now, and instead of auto advice giving, ask expansive questions. You're going to swap out what you think they should do. Any person comes to you with a problem, you're going to say, okay, before we get into it, tell me what you think you should do. And then just stop talking. And if the person says, I don't know, go, all right, well, let's just spitball it. Let's just brainstorm it. If you did know, take a stab, because your gut instinct about what you should do is 1,000 times more important than my thoughts about what you should do, because it's your life. But I'm here for it. Like, let's go, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a way to lovingly support and stay connected to the people in our lives when they're going through something. And listen, again, I'm not saying that we're never, ever again going to give someone our 2 cents.
Never.
Right. Never, ever in your whole life. Of course you will. What I'm saying is that don't let it be the first stop on the bus, because that shuts down the communication. What deepens the intimacy in our relationships is giving people in your life your attention, not the solutions, not treating people like projects, not thinking that you have the fix. Because even if you do, you don't, right? Like with my sister, I thought the fix was she needed to get away from an abusive, addicted boyfriend and get sober. Yeah, that was the fix. But did I have the answer? No, because she couldn't do it until she could do it, till she reached
Mm.
her bottom, till she was ready, till she could do it for herself. So even with children, right? I think that parents today were so afraid that kids are going to make mistakes and it's like really our job is to teach them deductive reasoning and critical thinking and consequences for actions. So if you have even a 7-year old who's like, I had the worst day at school today. Why'd you have a worst day? I had a fight with Bobby. Oh, so instead of, we don't fight in this family, or whatever platitude a parent might want to do,
Hmm.
like, did you get in trouble? What happened? Was the teacher there? You go, okay, first, tell me what happened. After they tell you what happened, then you go, now tell me, what do you think you should do about it? Even if they have a terrible idea. I think I should go in tomorrow and punch Bobby in the nose, right? As a parent, you're not going to agree and say, yes, that's what we're doing. But what you will get is really valid and important data about what that kid is thinking about and about where they need some help with some problem solving ideas. Because you're not going to let a 7-year old do what they want anyway.
Hmm.
But when we convey to them energetically and in real life that what they think matters, that how they feel matters, that they matter. Like I would always say to my kids, well, but what is your gut instinct? Because I think your gut is good. Because kids are really smart. And if their gut is bad, we will correct it, right? I'm not going to let them go in and beat up their friend or whatever it is. Same thing in relationships where we're so, for me, that I think ego wise, the hardest part of this whole realization about my own high functioning codependency was really grasping how I was centering every other person's problem sort of on me as the solution. And I was like, ew, I don't want to do that. That's so yuck. Now, you get over it, right, in therapy. What I really want is to know the people. The biggest flex, according to me, when it comes to love, it's not having the answers for the people you love. It's being with someone during their dark night of the soul in the foxhole and being willing to compassionately witness their excruciating pain or terror or whatever they're in without trying to tell them what to do. That is love because it is so hard to do,
Yeah.
but you can do it, right? And when you do, your relationships change.
That this affects both sides, right? Both people, yourself, you're doing this for yourself, and it helps the other person. Much like boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
My background is in neuropsychology, so I've actually had a few people on the show talk about this, the fact that your brain is most primed for learning when you have made a mistake or when it is activated in some way. And so to kind of rob somebody of those naturalistic consequences robs them of the ability to actually change for themselves sometimes.
I love that point that you just made because I used to always say this because I didn't know there was necessarily neuroscience to support it,
Hmm.
but I did know. I mean, we do talk about post traumatic growth,
Yeah.
right? We'll talk about that now. But long ago, I knew if I had a client who had a traumatic experience, we had a window of time that if we could together sort of tumble through it, through the therapeutic process, that we could get like 3 years of work done in 6 months. Like
Hmm.
the deconstruction of all of the defense mechanisms, right? When you have this like foundational shift of something that happens. Years ago, my husband and I were held up at gunpoint in our backyard. It was absolutely terrifying.
As one does.
As you know how it is, those things happen. And I was so pissed that I had so much, I was just having post traumatic stress, right?
Yeah.
Which of course makes sense, even if you're in therapy and even if, you're going to have it 3 to 6 months after an experience like that.
You should.
You're going to have something. I was just so pissed off about it. And yet I can see how that period of time, I was working with a trauma person and my regular therapy, it was just doing all the things, right?
Hmm.
Because I was scared to be alone in my house. I was so mad. I was so mad. Couldn't sleep, all the things where you're like, like I'm a stupid statistic is what it felt like. You know what I mean? Like I knew these things were coming, and yet I couldn't stop them from coming. And yet during that period of time, I did so much emotional growth.
Mm.
So I definitely, it makes sense to me
Yeah.
that our brains in some way, neurologically, but also emotionally, we are just on our knees. And now we're just going to build from the bottom up. At least that's how it felt for me, was that
Yeah.
all the shit was deconstructed. None of my defense mechanisms were working to manage this thing. So I was like, okay, I need to just actually deal with this thing that happened, and then we can move on from there.
Think about glass blowing, right? Like if you ever seen somebody blow and mold glass, they don't
Mm,
do it while it's cold, right? You gotta heat it up and activate it
yeah,
first.
that's a great analogy. I love it. It's so true because that's when it's malleable.
Mm.
Obviously, they couldn't do it when it was cold; it wouldn't work.
And it's ugly in the process, but it's beautiful afterward.
Yes, it is. All right, so can we talk a little bit about? I want to give a little more things that people can do. I don't want to
Yeah,
just leave
please.
people with like, you're probably like this and hope you figure it out.
See ya.
Um, exactly. Peace.
Yeah, yeah. More action items, absolutely.
Okay. So if you're wondering where you might be codependent, if you're wondering where you might need better boundaries, I'm going to ask you to do a resentment inventory. Super simple, exactly how it sounds. Take your time, think about the people in your life. We all know, literally. I could tell you right now because I'm still human, right? So you still are copying resentments at times, maybe not major, maybe you talk about them, but who are you feeling resentful, let's say, towards? So let's say the person said, I'm feeling resentful towards my sister. Okay, then you write down why. Because she goes to my apartment and borrows my things, but uses her key and doesn't ask me. Okay, what is my 50% of the problem? Right, that's the next question. Well, my 50% of the problem is that I've mentioned it to her once, but I really didn't tell her how upset I am about the fact that she keeps doing it. And then we move to an action item. Is there something that in time, doesn't have to be today, right? But in time, is there something that you could do? In that situation, you'd say, I need to tell the truth about how upset I am, and then create an ultimatum, which I did in my life. I wouldn't call it an ultimatum. We would call it a deal breaker instead of an ultimatum, even though they're kind of the same thing. That if it keeps happening, I'm going to have to take your key away so that you can't go to my house when I'm not there,
Mm.
right? That would be a consequence, goes along with a boundary, especially if you have a repeat boundary offender. So that's something that people can do easily. And I'm not saying that the action item is going to necessarily be easy per se.
Mm-hmm.
But I am saying that knowing what it is, taking responsibility for our part in sort of perpetuating those scenarios where we feel resentment is so helpful that it makes it easier to have the conversation. We start to identify because when we don't do the resentment inventory and we have these, it's almost like these broad strokes of emotions where we're like, I'm just annoyed.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody knows how
Non-specific.
to, yes, yes, the non-specific, it's almost like this low grade aggro. I just can't wait for someone to cut me off in traffic so I can fucking lose my shit on them. You know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I need to get this out, but it's not effective if it isn't targeted. It's not effective. It's just you'll feel relief from an explosion, even if it's displaced aggression type explosion. But your frustration with your sister going to your apartment without your permission will still be accumulating if you don't handle that.
Mm.
So that's something I feel like people can do like right away, easy
Yeah.
breezy.
Can I give you a hypothetical to challenge you with that?
Please.
Like, okay, so imagine somebody's doing this and their family pops up, a specific person or their family in general, and it's about something like political or social, right? Something
Yep.
like I resent my family because I can't believe they can feel this way about what's going
Oh,
on,
mm-hmm.
right? Um, what's their 50% of that?
Being on the wrong side of history, maybe. But if I'm thinking about what you're thinking about, but
Yeah, well, I mean, so like, the person who's writing it, right? So like, what's
mhm.
what's their own 50% of that?
Well, here's the thing: you're 50% in the solution. No, I feel like in that scenario, we can we have to say if we want to still have any relationship with people in our families, because lots of people have been through this in the pandemic and with the
Hmm.
political landscape in this country, that we have to decide. Some people decide, if you don't vote the way I vote, I can't have you in my life. So there are families that are fractured because of this. I decided that with my extended family, that I would have a rule that we will not talk about it. Even if they bring it up, even if they try to provoke it, I will leave a space. I will tell them. And once I made it clear, I was never talking about it with them. I don't want to know what you think, because then I will not like you, right?
Hmm.
Like, you're my family. It's important to me. These are people I see twice a year. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
right, if they got abducted by aliens, my life would still go on, but I would like to not be fractured. That's just my personality. So, in that scenario, that's an agree to disagree. And if it's too egregious for you to do that, limit your time with them. If they won't respect your desire not to talk about it, like for me, I had to actually say, absolutely not a chance am I talking about this with you. And if you continue to bring it up, I will not spend time with you. With one of my uncles, that
Hmm.
I just had to be like, I'm literally getting in my car and leaving. Like,
Hmm.
and
I'm
they're,
gonna
oh,
exit.
yeah, I'm so gone. So I think that with those scenarios, it depends on how close you are with your family. It's
Hmm.
very disheartening. I find I've had a lot of therapy, clients in this scenario, and it's worked out different ways for different ones. But for a lot, the don't ask, don't tell, even though many other people feel like that's cowardice and you should make them and change their minds. But for me, I'm not, my uncle's 84.
Hmm.
You know whose mind I'm not changing? His. I'm not, even if I really, really tried. I'm not. So for me, I'd rather put my energy into changing any systems that I might have a shot of changing, putting my
Hmm.
energy somewhere else, my money somewhere else, my calling somewhere else. You know what I mean?
Sure. So does that potentially become maybe an action item for that then? Is like it's not actually trying to change that person, but addressing the way that you feel through other means?
Yes. And the thing is, we're never really trying to change that person. What we're saying, if you think about boundaries, my definition of boundaries is I want you to think about them as your own personal rules of engagement. It lets other people know what's okay with you and what's not okay with you. Your boundaries are made up of your preferences, your desires, your limits, and your deal breakers.
Hmm.
So it's not a lever to control them. And this might sound like semantics, but I don't feel like it is. It's saying, I'd like to make a simple request that we not talk politics when we're together. Some people in the family will be like, okay. I did this with a friend, one of my very close friends' husband. And he was like, I mean, I guess. I was like, okay, so we're agreed. We will not talk politics together. Because for me, I find it very stressful and disheartening. And he's like, me? I never thought about it again. I was like, of course not. But anyway, um, I think that from the boundaries, we want to make sure that what we're doing is we have a right to protect ourselves, right? When we're on our side of the street, we have a right to protect ourselves. I think the work with boundaries is figuring out what is my side of the street. I have a great example, if it would be helpful, quickly, of a
Sure.
client who had a husband where they did a pretty good thing, but they were different. Like, he was like a night owl and she liked to go to bed early. And it bummed her out. Like, she wanted to go to bed together, like at some points, and he would come in and, he'd come in at midnight or 1. She's been sleeping since 10. And he would like flip on the light and get undressed in the room that she's in and basically wake her up. He'd go to sleep. She wouldn't be able to fall back asleep. And she was like, he should not be going to bed so late. He needs to work in the morning. This is right. So I'm like, okay.
Mm.
She's like, so this is my boundary. And I said, no, that's not your boundary. That is using the word boundary as like a lever to control someone. Because here's the thing, he's a grown man and he can go to bed anytime he wants. But where his stuff is spilling onto your side of the street is he's not being considerate. So your ask is not, hey, you need to get 8 hours of sleep a night because I'm your mother. No, that's not a boundary. That's control. Your ask is, hey, I'd like to make a simple request that you get undressed in the other bedroom and use this little headlamp thing that I bought you so that you don't wake me up when you come to bed after me. And can we please go to bed at 11, 2 nights a week together so maybe we can have sex or whatever. And that they actually came to terms with that. But she was able to ask for and sort of provide a solution that
Mm-hmm.
would work when she wasn't shaming him for not sleeping enough, when she wasn't like, you're a bad boy. And there was confusion for her. And as soon as we made the distinction, she was like, oh my God, you're right. His sleep habits are his side of the street. I'm like, right. Him bumping into him waking you up is your side of the street. She was like, okay, I got it. So did
Mm-hmm.
that clarify it all?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I know we keep diving down rabbit holes here, but I like being, comprehensive with the stuff and actually putting it to practice. So I appreciate you going there.
Sure.
Before I ask you for another action item, how are you on time? We have
Great.
about 50 minutes. Okay, cool.
Yep.
Then how about one more? You said the resentment inventory. What's
Yep.
another thing that people can do?
Okay. I have definitely more than one more, so we'll do as many as we can fit. But
You have
for
a book for
sure,
this. We'll talk about that too.
that's correct. Well, the two questions that I feel like when people are HFCs, a lot of times they're overfunctioning and overgiving and overdoing and overscheduled and exhausted. So before you say yes to another thing, you're going to ask yourself these two questions. Do I have the bandwidth to take this on without becoming resentful? Number two, do I even effing want to do this?
Yeah. We
Because
don't
how
always
much,
ask ourselves that.
how about we kind of never do?
Yeah.
Especially as a high functioning codependent, or if you're a high functioning people pleaser, we think if my friend wants me to do it, my mother wants me to do it, the other person wants me to do it, immediately it's like we get dropped into the other person's reality, right? It's almost like our reality disappears. And now we're in like, oh, they have a desire for me. They want something from me. If I don't do it, I will disappoint them,
Hmm.
right? Like, so can I disappoint them? Because part of the process of getting into recovery from being a high functioning codependent is we have to disappoint other people sometimes. And your relationships are not that fragile, and you're not that fragile. Because if you never do, I promise you, you are self abandoning so much because you know what you don't want to do. And again, I'll say another caveat. Obviously, if you're in relationships, if you're in a family, if you have friends, this is not to say we are never going to do shit we don't want to do. Of course, we are. If you knew how much live classical music I see because my husband loves it, you would die, right? But why do we do those things with our eyes open? Either because we love the other person. I'm not resentful about it because I'm not interested in classical music, but I'm extremely interested in my husband and he loves it, which brings me joy. Fine. So we can make choices with our eyes wide open. We can compromise, but we don't want to be doing this on automatic pilot. We don't want to be auto yesing
Hmm.
people in our lives. We need to slow down because here's the thing. We've taught people how to treat us, right? We've taught them how they when they can expect to hear back from us. We've taught them. And so now we need to teach them something different by having better boundaries, by surrendering to what is like really like life. What is my sister's life was her life, right? That the truth I needed to surrender, which was hard to do, to the fact that she wasn't ready to leave when I thought she should be ready to leave. And I needed to leave it until she was ready. And then I could help her appropriately, which I did. We need to let other people do what they're doing in life, even when we don't want them to. And yes, if it's your child or someone you really love, or you're going to say, hey, I have a concern. Can we talk about it? You can still do that, but it can't be this automatic thing where we're endlessly trying to control because it's just so much of it is about control.
Hmm.
It really is just this overt or covert bid to control other people's outcomes, as we said before. And we just need to understand that that's not for us. That is for them. And
Hmm.
we can be there for them and they can be there for us. And it's not even like even though, Mel Robbins has a book out now called Let Them. And there was actually a poem years ago called Let Them, sort of about the same thing, where when we liberate ourselves from thinking that we know everything that everyone else should be doing, we accept them for where they are. So it's almost like when your friend tells you like their idea for wherever it is. I have a friend who every time I'm talking about flying into LA because I spent a lot of time there, um, I'm like, I'm trying to get a car, I'm doing this thing. And she's like, why don't you fly into Bob Hope? Right. So she's always making the same suggestion that I fly into another airport. I'm like, Claudia, I don't ever want to do that. Please stop saying that. But you know what I mean? It's like there's
Yeah.
automatic advice where you're like, first of all, I'm not even looking for advice. I'm just telling you, I'm booking my tickets. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's annoying. It's like people trying to um, fix a problem that doesn't even exist half the time.
Right. And she
So
thinks she's just being nice or, being considerate or something like that.
yeah, but it's I mean, she doesn't do it anymore because years ago I was like, "Hi, I don't want to do that because the rental cars are 5 times more expensive there. That's fine. I don't mind LAX. You hate it because you're like a very gentle soul. I don't mind it anyway." Um, so those were my last few sort of thoughts on what people can do. But I think stopping the auto yes
Mm-hmm.
is something that all of this requires us to just be tapping the brakes
Mm-hmm.
and
Give a beat, like you
allowing,
said.
yeah, yes, and space, like space between the conversation, space between the ask and the answer. You are now telling people, I don't decide immediately, and we can say it funny, like, hey, I have a 24-hour decision making policy, so I'll
Sure.
let you know tomorrow for my sanity, right? We can use humor. It can be tongue in cheek. But what I'm saying is that, first of all, you don't owe anyone an immediate response unless, like, your house is on fire, literally. Bad
Right.
example. But you know what I'm saying? Like, you don't. And I feel like a lot of times when we're people pleasers or HFCs, anything undone leaves us feel like
Mm-hmm.
kind of anxious. Let's start teaching people that you give yourself time to make decisions and that you can say no to things simply because you don't want to do them or you don't like them. People will invite me. I mean, back in the day, not anymore because everybody knows, but back in the day, people would be like, oh my God, let's go to live music outside. And I'm like, couldn't possibly want to do anything less. Bugs, sun, people talking while I want to be listening. Like, no, thank you. And I will say, hey, not my thing. Have a great time. Did my friend invent outside concerts? No. Why should they be offended? And if
Right.
they want to spend time with me, it's got to be doing something that we both actually want to do. And again, I think that back to the two questions we ask, can I do this without becoming resentful? Or do I even effing want to do it? That is something that when you start implementing that in your life, there'll be a lot of things. You'll
Mm-hmm.
be like, wow, I do a lot of things I don't necessarily want to do. And then you can go through and see, are there things that I can take off my list? Are there things I can start saying no to? Can I make changes so that I'm really prioritizing my own preference in a way that feels expansive and that feels good?
It's kind of proving to yourself as well. I imagine there's an adjustment period because it's kind of proving to yourself that not everything is that urgent, not everything is that high stakes, not everything is that dangerous, even though it feels like it to you.
Yes. Yes, that's such a good point. But the feeling, right? We have to expect that if we make these changes, that there's going to be some pushback, right? That the people you've been dancing with, your relationship people, right? Your dancing partners, so to speak, you start to do a new dance, people are going to notice, especially the troop you've been dancing with the longest, which is your family of origin.
Mm-hmm.
So expect some pushback and know that it's okay to just say, hey, people will be like, what do you mean? We always do Christmas at your house. Let's just say, I know. And I feel like it's somebody else's turn now. I'm tired. And I actually think we should do potluck and let's do it at Bobby's because his house is bigger than mine. And I don't want to do all the cooking and all the cleaning anymore. Like, people will get over it.
She's so selfish.
Exactly. Yes, she is. And that's okay. Or I can see you're struggling. with this change. And I really appreciate you respecting my boundary on this.
Great. So I feel like we could keep going at this for another hour or
I
two, something
know,
like that. I do
seriously.
want to ask you though about, the book itself. I want to give you a chance to talk about that. Like, how is the
Sure.
book structured? What can people expect when they pick it up?
It's very much about them. So the way that I've written my other book, and I also have a workbook, it's very much like here are the concepts. It's done in order. So it's not one of those books you can just open up. You're going to be learning something. I'm walking you through
Hmm.
from the beginning to the end. So we go through concepts. I start with an anchor story so that because I think illustrating stuff is so much more interesting. And then I go through some concepts and then I bring it right back to you. So there's sections that are literally called back to you.
Hmm.
And they have questions where it's like, in your life, is this happening? Is that happening? So that people can start to identify where they are being codependent, where they are having boundary issues, um, family of origin stuff. I walk you through a downloaded relational blueprint called your HFC blueprint. So you start to really understand like, listen, you make sense. You make sense. Your mind makes sense. It might not be adaptive now, but trust me, whatever you're doing, whatever you've been repeating, whatever hasn't been working for you, it worked for you amazingly at one point in your young life. So part of it is also normalizing people's experience because I could never just, we have to go in before we go out. So people will, love, I give like scripts every week in my community where, people love that. But I'm also like, listen, if we don't go in, those scripts are not going to work because you have to understand why is it hard to say no? Or why do you find yourself repeatedly in a relationship with someone who's unavailable?
Hmm.
So I walk you through the downloaded blueprint, but also I call it repeating relationship realities, where we start to understand why.
Hmm.
What is the original injury that has me being in this unsatisfying relationship or job or friendships or whatever it is? And there's a tool. Well, there's two actually really great ones that I think that people can just pluck out and stick in their back pocket. But if you find yourself stuck in any part of your life where you're like, how am I here again? Oh my God. Whether it's mismanaging money, whether it's being in relationships with unavailable people, whether it's not being able to lose weight, whatever the thing is for you, I promise you, there is some kind of secondary gain that is like hidden.
Hmm.
So, what is secondary gain, right? It's the unobvious gain that we get from staying stuck where we are. So I'm going to give you this. You can just ask yourself this question, and it might dislodge some answer for you. Um, what do I get to not face, not feel, not experience by staying stuck here? So during the pandemic, one of my clients was drinking heavily, as everyone else was too. I knew her for a long time, and she really didn't have a history. So I was like, this is circumstantial, But she was like, I don't want to drink during the week anymore. I was like, okay. She's like, I really want you to hold me accountable. I was like, okay. So then week one, she was like, I made it to Tuesday. I was like, okay, all right, okay. So let's talk about why, blah blah. Next week, she's like, didn't even make it to Tuesday. I was like, okay. So then I asked her the secondary gain questions. What do you get to not face, not feel, not experience by drinking 3 huge glasses of wine every night? And she just blurted out that my marriage is over. I was like, oh. So I guess instead of obsessing about your drinking, we should be talking about the end of your marriage, which is exactly what we did.
Hmm.
But does that illustrate how the secondary gain? It's not primary gain. It's like sneaky. We
Sure.
don't understand like how could I be here again? But there's always a reason that you're there again. And this tool is something that sometimes can just quickly help you, like it did with that client. She hadn't been talking about her marriage at all
Right.
in sessions until that moment, and then she was like, oh my God, this is really what it's about. So that I think could be really helpful for people if you find yourself stuck in any way, to
Yeah.
see what is really going on for me.
I can tell you really love the book. Like,
I do.
and I think that's such a great thing that you really like the product that you've made. You probably wish you had
Yes.
it back then, huh?
Oh, yes, I really do. I wrote the book, and I know people say this, but it's the truth, that I it would have really changed my life, but then I never would have written the book. So I guess
Thank
it
you for your
needed to.
sacrifice.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that's great. In the audiobook, you did an audiobook for it, right? Did you record that or was that recorded by somebody else?
Oh, no, me, for sure.
Awesome. Awesome. So you get your inflection and all of that.
Yes, and actually, I really listen. I did Boundary Boss too, and
Hmm.
people loved it, both of them. But I felt so. I really feel like too much. This book, audiobook, is really good. Like I really felt so much more of masterful. Because when you're first doing an audiobook, you don't have no an idea what you're doing. Like you
Right.
literally don't. You're like, I'm reading this whole thing. It feels so weird, so
Yeah.
unnatural. And so I'd already done Boundary Boss and I had done the Boundary Boss workbook, which was such a weird thing to do an audio for. And I was
Right.
like, it's got to be easier than that. And it was actually so great. And the response has been so good. There, you can go on Amazon and see the reviews are really,
Yeah.
really great, which warms my heart because my desire really endlessly is to create anything that helps people lessen their own suffering and elevate their own joy. Honestly, that's what it is, and I really feel like it does that.
That's great. Is there, aside from the book, anything else that you want to shout out or point people toward before we wrap up?
Well, when will this go live? That would determine what I would talk about.
When do you want it to go
Well,
live?
I have a mastermind that starts March 1st.
Okay.
That if this goes live before then, that'd be great.
Yeah.
That I'm really extremely lit up about. This will be the third year that I'm doing it. It's only 10 to 12 women,
Hmm.
entrepreneurs who are looking to, yes, make more money. Maybe they want to make a podcast. Maybe they want to write successful books. Maybe all of that. But they also want to deal with their limiting beliefs. So it's really both. It's like a business mastermind, but then it's also, psychologically informed. You get 3 one-on-one meetings with me, and it's really the only way that people can really work with me.
Hmm.
So that is Flourish is the name of that, and people can go to terricole.com/flourish. And I also have a community that I'm super lit up about that I meet weekly,
Mm.
literally every week. So if you're listening to this and you're like, I really liked this vibe of
Yeah.
Q&A and hanging out and learning something, that's basically what we do. And it also gives people access to my 4 signature courses. And it's only $59 a month. And the courses are all between $500 and $1,500. So it actually is a really good deal. If you
Hmm.
pay in full, you get 2 months free. And that is terricole.com TCM, which is Terri Cole membership.
Okay. So if you go to terrycole.com, you'll be able to see the mastermind, that group, the
I
books,
sure hope
everything like
so.
that. You
I
have
do.
podcasts too?
I do. I've had a pod since 2015,
Yeah.
baby.
That's you.
It,
You got me by 1 year.
I love it. So you're
I
an
started in
OG
2016.
too?
Hmm.
Right on, Robert. What made you start it?
Oh Jesus. Okay. Well, that's a conversation that would be another. I mean, really, essentially, it's because I kept getting too many emails for things that I couldn't answer
Yep.
directly without a
Yep.
therapeutic relationship with them. So I directed it back out to the public.
I love it. That's the same thing with writing books, right? Where you go to page 115, where
Yeah.
it's the stuff that we know people need to know. And so it's all informed by the questions you get. That's so great. But
Yeah.
we really are a part of like the OGs of podcasts because now everyone in the world has a pod, but that's a long time. You've had a
Well,
pod for
yeah,
nine
it wasn't
years.
wasn't cool back then.
No, but
Yeah.
we still did it every friggin' week for almost this September. It'll be a decade that I've been doing it.
What episode are you almost up to, or what are you
Like
around now?
670 or something.
Yeah, yeah, I'll be coming up on 500 soon, and it's like, wow, really? We talked that much about stuff? Okay.
And I feel like I could do it forever, though, honestly, because life is just endlessly fascinating.
What's the show called?
The Terry Cole Show.
Okay, perfect, perfect. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for sitting and talking with me, and I think a lot of people will really get something out of this.
I'm so excited. I also want to give you a gift, so let me do it. It's an HFC toolkit
Okay.
because we really remember we did talk about a lot of stuff. And this kind of narrows it down. If people are like, where do I start? Here's where you start. And you can get that at terrycole.com/HFC.
Awesome. Great place to end.
Thanks for having me so much. I really enjoyed it.